What's up, everybody? Pumper Jumping here. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the United States' possible true intentions in Antarctica and what I've come to conclude from my research. And so today we're going to be discussing American imperialism, the American Empire, the Australian Antarctic Territory, and how this is kind of like a bit of a problem. Why the United States wanted to claim Antarctica, why it wants to, why it didn't, and its future plans to do so. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the history behind it, some of the American imperial ambitions where it kind of got distracted, and that's basically what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to be reading off my script. I do have dyslexia, so sometimes I might slip up with my words. Um, but yeah, so keep that mind you. But yeah, so let's get right into it. Um, so so yeah, I basically already did my own introduction, so I'm not going to bother about. Actually, no, I'll read this. I've delved into the intricate realm of Antarctica, and I find it to be a subject of profound fascination. Drawing upon my research, I have uncovered the genuine intentions of the United States with regards to Antarctica. Do you truly believe that America's professed devotion to scientific research is unwavering, and its activities in Antarctica don't serve to conceal alternative motives? And why do they never recognise the Australian Antarctic Territory and Antarctic claims as a whole? So it's very interesting because we kind of have a defence treaty with the United States, because a lot of people don't realise that the Anzac Treaty, even though it's like you usually think of Anzacs as like Australia and New Zealand fighting side by side, it's technically it's a defence treaty between Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. So it basically means that all three of us have to help each other in times of war and conflict. But yeah, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, so you keep that in mind. So with the United States not claiming parts of things that Australia claims as our own, it can cause a bit of tension, especially with because Australia, we always get involved in foreign conflicts that doesn't involve our own national interests, in terms of like advancing Australia for Australians, you know what I mean? But yeah, but anyway, how Australia gained sovereignty over Wilkes Land in Antarctica and the United States issue. Okay, here's the history part, guys. In 1933, the British government transferred significant portions of Antarctica, around 42%, to Australia under the Australian Antarctic Territory Acceptance Act. This territory became known as the Australian Antarctic Territory, known as AAT for short. Among the regions included were the districts named after British whalers and explorers, honouring their roles in chartering the region. For example, parts of the AAT such as Enderby Land, Kemp Land, and George V Land reflects the contributions of British seafarers and adventurers who explored these frozen landscapes in pursuit of resources and discovery. Okay. However, a unique aspect of the AAT is Wilkes Land. So if you don't know, Wilkes Land is basically a district within the Australian Antarctic Territory. And yeah, this region was named after Lieutenant Charles Wilkes of the United States Navy. Between 1838 and 1842, Wilkes led the United States exploring expedition which mapped over 1,500 miles of the Antarctic coastline. His work focused primarily on the eastern coast of Antarctica, which eventually came to be known as Wilkes Land. At that time, in 1841, the British declared Wilkes Land as unclaimed land. This declaration was accurate in the sense that no nation had formally laid claim to Wilkes Land. The British then used Wilkes Land for whaling activities. Later, the British transferred rights over Wilkes Land to Australia through the Australian Antarctic Territory Acceptance Act of 1933. This act allowed Australia to officially accept and govern the territory, which included Wilkes Land. Now, this is what the United States would argue. Since Wilkes Land was never claimed by anyone, Australia accepted. Sorry, this is not it. Accepted of the act established. Sorry. Since Wilkes Land was not claimed by anyone, Australia accepted the act, established its sovereignty over Wilkes Land, making Wilkes Land officially claimed under Australia for the first time in history. No other nation, including the United States, has historically laid claim to Wilkes Land. Now, you may be thinking, if no other nation has historically claimed Wilkes Land, how did the United Kingdom transfer it to Australia? Now, see, that's why the United States doesn't actually recognise Wilkes Land as being a part of Australia, or the vast majority of the AAT, because the vast majority of the AAT was never actually officially claimed by Britain. What happened is they transferred it to Australia under the Australian Antarctic Treaty Acceptance Act, making it be claimed by Australia, and for the first time in history. And it was the first time these lands have ever been officially claimed by any nation. The United Kingdom transferred land to Australia that it never claimed itself to be theirs. So that's why the United States kind of doesn't recognise it. But it's rightfully Australian because no other nation has ever claimed it before. So Australia, under the Australian Antarctic Territory Acceptance Act, officially Australia laid claim to it for the first time, and no other nation has claimed it, so it's up for grabs. You know what I mean? Solidifying it as part of the Australian Antarctic Territory. The United States argues that Britain did not officially document this claim on paper before. Since the UK never officially laid claim to Wilkes Land, they never had the rights to transfer it to Australia, in the United States' opinion, in the American view. This makes Australia's sovereignty over Wilkes Land invalid in their view. Okay. Why the United States never claimed Wilkes Land? The United States never made a claim to Wilkes Land due to its focus on its plans and the eventual invading of Mexico during the Mexican-American War, which began in 1846 and concluded in 1848, resulting in the illegal and unprovoked annexation of half of Mexico. So basically what happened there is, Mexico was a very peaceful nation, stuck to itself, and what happened is America sent settlers into Mexico, and they brought slaves over. Mexico didn't want any slaves in Mexico, so they tried punishing them and banning the slaves. They got very angry about not wanting to be able to have slaves, so they kind of declared independence from Mexico, which was Mexico's view invalid because they're I'm pretty sure they didn't even have citizenship. I could be wrong about that, but they just moved over there. And basically what happened is Texas declared independence. It was kind of like a disputed territory between, Texas and Mexico. And the United States knew it was disputed territory. They kind of sent troops into this area, Texas. So Mexico viewed it as an invasion, and it was an invasion, to be honest. And they knew Mexico would do this. They deliberately provoked them. And Mexico then attacked those troops, killed them all, and then America said Mexico killed Americans on American soil, and then America invaded Mexico and defeated them. And then they took over like half of Mexico, which is a big portion of, the current day United States. Like, I don't remember all of the states off by heart, but it was like Texas, Nevada, Los Angeles. Oh no, sorry. Isn't that a city? No. Yeah, that's a city. What's the state called? California, sorry. Supposed to say California. And yeah, so they had like all of these areas that were part of Mexico, and the United States annexed them and took them over. It was like a part of their deliberate plan. Very unprovoked conflict. Okay. This conflict diverted America's attention away from its imperial ambitions in Antarctica. So that was like the Mexican-American War. America kind of got distracted from Antarctica for a bit. After the war, the United States turned its focus to other territories such as Hawaii, which was overthrown in a coup in 1893 and officially annexed in 1898. So yeah, the United States kind of came in, they kind of corrupted the local politicians. I mean, I don't think they're called politicians. I'm pretty sure they're called chiefs. But they kind of like bribed them and all that sort of stuff. They kind of started using them as like slaves for sugarcane and all that. And then I think they wanted, I forgot what the exact reason was, but they wanted to like, I'm pretty sure it was like a tax or whatever they wanted to do. And they wanted their own land back because a lot of it was owned by the Americans. Because like in the Hawaiian culture, they don't have like well, back then they didn't have this kind of like you own this land. It was sort of like community owned. And in the United States view, it was kind of like too close to communism. This kind of like uh you know how do I explain it, like kind of like state community owned type thing, like owned by the people. Um, Instead of like individuals, like a community owned thing. So they kind of, but it was mainly driven by wanting to have less tax. That was sort of the main reason why. So they kind of overthrew the government, like the chief and all that, the royal family, and they did like a massive big coup. And yeah, and but yeah, that was basically that. Anyway, so let's continue with the script. And the Spanish-American War in 1898, during which it acquired Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, Northern Mariana Islands. The Philippines were officially annexed in 1899, marked, mark, marking a significant expansion of the American territory holdings in the Pacific and beyond. And later in 1900, they took American Samoa. So basically, what they did is they basically said to the locals, you're under colonial occupation. The Americans were going to free you from this colonial occupations, and we're going to set you free and all this sort of stuff. And what they did is they lied about this for the most part. They kept most of these nations, like they kept Guam, they kept Puerto Rico, they kept the Northern Mariana Islands. They tried to keep the Philippines, but they had a bit of a war that happened there, where they kind of crushed Filipino resistance for independence because the Filipinos kind of woken up a little bit. They were basically like, hold on, we've been fighting Spain for our independence for a very long time, and yous kind of came in and colonized us, claiming yous were going to free us, and yous didn't. So they kind of launched their own war, but the United States crushed them, and they kept Philippines all the way up until I think it was just after or before World War II. I'm pretty sure they had the Philippines, and the Philippines is actually attacked before Hawaii, and they kind of just ignored it. They didn't really care about it um, at the beginning. But getting a little bit sidetracked. Let's go back to Antarctica. Okay. The renewed American interest in Antarctica. The next significant US expedition to Antarctica came nearly a century later in the late 1920s under the leadership of Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Sorry, I don't know what this word is. Amundsen, whatever that word is, South Scott Pole Station expedition in 1928 to 1930, reviving American interest in the continent. This marked the beginning of a series of U.S. expeditions that would significantly influence influence Antarctica's geopolitical landscape. The first Bride Antarctic expedition, 1928 to 1930, saw Bride lead a team to the South Pole and conduct aerial surveys. But by this time, Britain had already transferred its Antarctic claims, including Wilkes Land, to Australia under the Australian Antarctic Territory Acceptance Act of 1933. And later, the Ross Dependency was also transferred to New Zealand in 1923 under British Order Council of Ross Dependency. But the USA never recognised the New Zealand claim either. They have a very strong interest in the Ross Dependency areas. That's where McMurdo Station is, the United States logistical hub of Antarctica, and the biggest research base in all of Antarctica by far. Anyway, the US remained persistent in its Antarctic activities. Bride's second Antarctic expedition, 1933 to 1935, continued exploring around the Ross Ice Shelf and Mary Bird Land, further advancing scientific knowledge and geopolitical interest. This was followed by the United States Antarctic Service Expedition, 1939 to 1941. Now, a very interesting thing you got to keep in mind is you may be thinking, they just want to do science. It was partly because of that, science and exploring and all that, but all the nations who were exploring Antarctica at this time had territory ambitions, like all the nations like the United Kingdom, France, the Spanish Empire, they all claimed parts of Antarctica. I don't know if the Spanish actually physically mapped Antarctica, but I know Argentina and Chile definitely did do a lot of expeditions, and Norway too. But yeah, which focused on Mary Bride Land and the Palmer Peninsula. This period also coined with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's statement in 1939, reaffirming that the United States has never recognized any sovereign claims to Antarctic territory. So yeah, that's a very interesting one. Franklin D. Roosevelt stated in 1931 that the United States never recognized any sovereign claims to Antarctic territory. This was just after some of their expeditions, right? So at this time, you can kind of see all of these nations kind of claiming land in Antarctica, and Roosevelt kind of came out later saying, the United States, we don't recognize any of these claims to these lands, nothing like that. And yeah, so that's very interesting. So he wants to reaffirm that he does not recognize these claims. Okay, security issues it faces to Australia. The United States treatment of the Australian Antarctic Territory poses a significant challenge to Australia's national security, and undermines our sovereignty. The United States has refused to acknowledge the Australian claim to the territory, which was granted to us by Britain in 1933, in which the British Empire previously controlled, and later, during decolonisation. So you have to remember, Australia and New Zealand were kind of British colonies. And, once we got independence, they eventually gave us parts of the Antarctica, decolonisation, giving us land. So you see a lot of the American propaganda around Antarctica is saying all these Antarctic nations like Australia and New Zealand, they will have colonial ambitions in Antarctica. They kind of want to claim this land. They kind of say this sort of narrative. But if you actually look into the facts, it's actually decolonisation on behalf of Britain to Australia and New Zealand, because it's an empire giving away land, its colonies. I mean, Antarctica wasn't a colony, but land, giving away land that they claimed to Australia and New Zealand, right? And then yes, I know I said earlier, some of the land they go to Australia and New Zealand, the UK didn't officially claim, but some of it they did, like the Ross dependency and stuff like that, and parts of the AET. Anyway, so let's get back to the script. The United Kingdom decided to give parts of Antarctica to its former colonies, like I was saying, Australia and New Zealand. By disregarding our sovereignty over the Antarctic territory, the United States has compromised our national security and created an unsettling precedent of selective recognition of sovereignty. This is particularly alarming considering the defence treaties we have with the United States. This can undermine the effectiveness of these agreements, especially in the rise of China's interest in Antarctica. And Antarctica as a whole, China has done illegal fishing in the Australian Antarctic Territory and is directly looking for resources. So China's been pretty sketchy lately with Antarctica. They've been possibly looking for natural resources in there. If you look at all the Chinese research stations in the Australian Antarctic Territory, they literally line up in a perfect line, right? And if you look at all the territorial claims in Antarctica, they all kind of like do these ones, right? They kind of like merge downwards into the center of Antarctica. So the fact China is doing like this kind of little line thing is very suspicious, and we have to be keeping a very good eye on China. Okay. Let's get back to the script. Australia has always been a puppet helping the United States in their wars around the world. But when it comes to Australia's interest, it's another story. If any nation was to lay claim to the AAT, America would not help Australia if a war would break out, like China claiming our land. The United States, they wouldn't care. They'd probably call out Australia for like colonialism and all that sort of stuff. I mean, they would condemn China, but they would also condemn Australia too. But yeah, we will get to the Antarctic Treaty soon, and how this plays both American interests and Australian interests, and how by establishing the treaty, America can stop these countries from inserting claims to the land, and at the same time stop wars, making it look desirable for countries like Australia. So Australia willingly signed the Antarctic Treaty, knowing we're giving away land. So the United States kind of like tricked us by they did this massive big Soviet scare tactic. That was their main thing, by pretending to be our friend. Like the Soviets are looking to claim this land, we got your back, all this sort of stuff. Anyway, World War II and how it played a role, and how USA got a reserve claimant status. So if you don't know, the United States claims, like I was saying before, the United States claims that its motive is purely scientific research. It is purely keeping like the peace in Antarctica, avoiding any conflict or territorial claims or anything like that. It just wants Antarctica to be this peaceful international cooperation. That's the official narrative. But like, if this is their goal, why did they call for the United States to have a reserve claimant status? Why did they claim the United States to be able to have the ability to claim land? Now, this is not some official agreement by any other nation. They just officially came out and said we have a right to claim land in Antarctica. So let's get this straight. What they wanted to do, they explored a lot of Antarctica, right? Just like the United Kingdom, France, Chile, Argentina, right? They explored a lot of this land. They had military expeditions there with the military. They refused to recognize any other country's land, but they also claimed they have a right to claim land in Antarctica, right? So, is their motive truly about, you know, um, scientific research? I don't think so. There's underlying motives underlying motives behind the scenes. But yeah. Anyway, let's get to the script. In 1941, the same year as the United States Antarctic Surface Expedition ended, Japan bombed Hawaii, bringing USA into World War II, distracting it from Antarctica, for the most part, but not completely, as the Soviet, Japanese, and Germans also had interest in Antarctica in World War II. The USA ramps up its Antarctic operations with a series of ambitious missions. In Operation High Jump, 1946 to 1947, Admiral Bride led one of the largest USA Antarctic expeditions, which aimed to map vast areas of Antarctica in the last unclaimed area and to assert a possible territorial claim. So they're also planning on doing a territorial claim. USA also had missions in Queen Mudland, which is claimed by Norway, and the Ross Sea region claimed by New Zealand. So you have to remember they kind of made these claims. 1946. Where was it? Sorry, I kind of lost it. But they kind of made these statements. We have the right to make claims of land, and they kind of sending a mission there for possible territorial claims in Antarctica and Mary Bride Land, which is discovered by an American. Anyway, let's get back to the scripts. Admiral Bride led one of the largest USA expeditions, which aimed to map vast areas of Antarctica in the last unclaimed area and to assert a possible territorial claim. USA also had missions in Queen Mudland, claimed by Norway, and the Ross Sea region, claimed by New Zealand. The next year, Operation Windmill, 1947 to 1948, returned to previously surveyed areas, including Wilkes Land, to further photograph and map the coastline. These missions demonstrated the United States' growing interest in Antarctica, particularly in regions that other nations, including Australia, had already laid claim to. Interestingly, Germany also made a claim to Antarctica during World War II. It was during this period that the USA made several unsettling declarations regarding its stance on Antarctic sovereignty. Okay, now this is very interesting, guys. Keep note of this. Pay very close attention. In 1948, Jacqueline Aitchison, or whatever his name is, then the United States Secretary of State, stated that the United States had not recognized any territorial claims made by other nations in Antarctica. He went further, claiming a reserve. He went further, reserving all rights for the United States might have in the region, and phrasing America's potential interest in asserting territorial claims if necessary, giving the USA a reserved claimant status in their view. This declaration set the stage for future USA policies in Antarctica, signaling that the USA had no intention of relinquishing its Antarctic ambitions. No intentions of relinquishing its Antarctic ambitions. Now, let's get back to the script. Isn't it intriguing to consider the deeper involvement of the United States in exploring of Antarctica, alongside other nations like Norway, France, and the United Kingdom, all of which have laid claims to Antarctic territory? It raises an interesting point to note that the United States, despite its significant contributions to explorations of the region, failed to assert its own claim over these lands before others did. Furthermore, one cannot overlook the fact that the United States happened to discover Mary Bird Land, which remained the last unclaimed part of Antarctica when the treaty was crafted. After World War II, the establishment of the Antarctic Treaty. Let's get right into that. In the 1950s, the USA Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, echoed his stance. He highlighted the extensive activities of the USA expeditions and made it clear that the USA reserved the right to assert territorial claims in Antarctica. His statements were made just before the Antarctic Treaty, a landmark agreement ensuring that Antarctica would be used solely for peaceful purposes and scientific research. But Dooley's words left later doubt that the United States was keeping a watchful eye on the region, including areas like Wilkes Land, which Australia had claimed, or I should say had owned, or owns, not just a claim, because like a claim could be anything, like a claim doesn't mean it's factual or official, but I should have wrote owned there. Anyway, the USA continued to bolster its presence in Antarctica with Operation Deep Freeze, 1955 to 1956. This mission, led by Rear Admiral George D. Dufek, focused on establishing permanent research stations, particularly at McMurdo Sound and Bride Station. While much of the USA attention centered on the Ross Dependency and Mary Bride Land, operations in Wilkes Land and Queen Mud Land remain part of the broader strategic picture. Even though the USA had not directly challenged Australia's sovereignty over Wilkes Land, the historical claims and declarations by American officials, from Franklin D. Roosevelt to Dean Acheson and John Foster Dulles, indicate a persistent underlying interest in the region. Given the USA's assertive history in Antarctica, Australia cannot afford to ignore the possibilities that America, with its unmatched resources and logistical Antarctic presence, could one day pose a threat to sovereignty of the Australian Antarctic territory, including Wilkes Land. However, through scientific operations or diplomatic maneuvering, the USA has repeatedly demonstrated its unwillingness to forfeit potential rights in Antarctica, leaving open the question of future American intentions in the region. Furthermore, the United States played a pivotal role in establishing the Antarctic Treaty in 1959, which aimed to preserve any nation from asserting sovereignty over the continent and preserved it for scientific research. However, it is worth noting that the United States itself claims to have a reserved claimant status. This reserved claimant status grants certain rights to claim land in their view. It's interesting that every time American explorers found an area that had already been claimed by another nation before the United States could officially claim it, the only area that was left was Mary Bride Land. It is worth noting that the United States created the Antarctic Treaty to prevent the Russians from making a territorial claim before the United States and Mary Bride Land, as they feared the United States might not secure a slice of Antarctica. This was the perfect opportunity to create propaganda. In fact, the United States and other nations conducted Operation High Jump, the largest military operation in Antarctica's history, in anticipation of which Operation High Jump was in Mary Bride Land. Okay, so keep that in mind. Such observations prompt us to question the underlying motives behind the United States' unwavering insistency on keeping Antarctica unclaimed. If scientific research and conservation were truly its primary agenda, one might wonder why the United States opted to secure a reserved claim status for dedication to maintaining the status quo in Antarctica, and prompts us to ponder the true intentions behind its actions, considering land it discovered are claimed by its allies. In conclusion, the United States disregarded for Australia's sovereignty over the Australian Antarctic Territory and its strategic interest in Antarctica raises concerns. If this isn't imperialism, I don't know what is. The United States stripped land from other countries that it had never claimed by anyone else before. What right does America have? The United States was losing the race to claim land and had the audacity to take lands away from others and put its name down as a claimant status to land it is not entitled to.